5 massive oil tankers, each carrying hundreds of thousands of barrels of Russian crude, were drifting endlessly on the open sea. Their destinations? India's biggest refineries. But in December of 2025, something shocking happened. India's top 5 refineries suddenly refused delivery. Overnight, 3.4 million barrels of oil were stranded, stuck at sea for more than 10 days, unable to dock. Why would a country walk away from cheap Russian oil, the kind that saves billions of dollars? What could possibly make India risk angering its supplier, and the world watching its every move? Here's the twist. The oil Russia had hoped to sell to India didn't just sit there. To move it, Russia had to cut the price to $35 per barrel, a staggering discount that saved China at least $68 million. That's right. A deal that should have been a goldmine for India suddenly ended up boosting China instead. This isn't just a story about oil, it's a high-stakes geopolitical drama playing out on the waves. Today, we'll unpack exactly why India made this dramatic move, how Russia responded, and what it means for the global energy market. To understand why India's sudden move caused such a global stir, we first need to see why Russian oil is so crucial. Think of it as the lifeblood of Russia's economy. Without it, the country would struggle to keep its financial engine running. Since the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia's oil has been a prime target for Western sanctions. Europe and the United States didn't just stop buying oil, they froze assets, blocked payments, and even restricted Russia from using international financial systems like SWIFT. It was like trying to cut off a river at its source, no easy way for Russia to sell its energy and get paid. Despite this, Russia managed to export massive volumes. In 2025 alone, it shipped more than 250 million barrels of crude oil, earning roughly $150 billion if refined products are included. That's like a small country's entire GDP flowing through energy trade. These exports weren't just numbers on a balance sheet. They kept factories running, salaries paid, and the economy from collapsing under high-intensity sanctions. But here's the catch: to maintain buyers under these extreme conditions, Russia had to do something unusual. It slashed prices drastically. At one point, crude oil was going for as low as $35 per barrel. It wasn't generosity, it was survival. Russia couldn't afford to lose buyers, and cheap oil became the only tool to keep its economic lifeline alive. This sets the stage for understanding India and China's role. Russia's dependence on these buyers wasn't just about business, it was about keeping the country afloat under the weight of global pressure. If Russian oil is the engine keeping the country's economy running, then India and China are the fuel that powers it. These two countries are Russia's biggest customers, and their demand can make or break Russia's export strategy. Take India, for example. In 2024, India imported a staggering 232 million tons of crude oil. Nearly 38% of that, about $52 billion worth, came from Russia, saving India around $13.5 billion that year alone. To put that into perspective, that's enough money to fund millions of scholarships or build hundreds of kilometers of highways. January 2024 even saw a record-breaking month, with 21 million tons imported, the highest in nearly a decade. But there's more than just volume. The way countries pay for this oil adds a layer of complexity. Russia prefers to be paid in rubles or yuan rather than the Indian rupee. Why? The rupee isn't freely convertible on the global market, so holding large amounts of it would be like hoarding gift cards you can't spend anywhere else. Russia wanted currency it could actually use to buy goods and technology abroad. This created a delicate balancing act. Indian companies wanted cheap Russian oil, but Russia needed a form of payment that worked globally. In some cases, Indian refineries even agreed to pay partially in yuan, showing how both sides were willing to compromise to keep trade flowing. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it sets up the pressure point. India's heavy reliance on Russian oil made the sudden refusal in December 2025 even more shocking, and it also shows how geopolitics and currency logistics can directly shape energy markets, a theme we'll explore next when we talk about the United States' role. So, what actually pushed India to walk away from cheap Russian oil? The answer lies across the ocean. In Washington, D.C., in 2025, the United States imposed a series of tariffs on Indian exports, hitting key sectors like textiles, pharmaceuticals, and fisheries. For India, these industries aren't just numbers on a trade report. They employ millions of people and operate on razor-thin profit margins. A sudden jump in tariffs, which in some cases reached a total of 50%, was like adding a massive weight on their shoulders overnight. Production costs shot up and India's price advantage in the US market evaporated almost instantly. Why did the US do this? Officially, it framed the move as a national security measure aimed at countering Russia's influence through global oil trade. But beneath the surface, the strategy was clear: make it risky for India to keep buying Russian oil. The United States essentially drew a red line. Cross it, and Indian companies could face serious consequences in the world's largest market. This created a high-stakes dilemma. On one hand, India could continue to buy cheap Russian crude, saving billions. On the other, they risked severe economic fallout and potential secondary sanctions from the US. Suddenly, energy choices weren't just about dollars per barrel. They were about geopolitics, trade relationships, and survival. The stage was set for the next dramatic escalation: the introduction of secondary sanctions under the Russia Oil Profit Reduction Act. This would change the game entirely, making India's decision unavoidable. The tension between India and Russia reached a breaking point with the introduction of a new US law, the Russia Oil Profit Reduction Act of 2025. Unlike traditional sanctions that target only a country's own companies, this law introduced secondary sanctions, meaning it could punish any company, anywhere in the world, that continued trading with Russia's oil. Imagine this like a global do-not-trade sign backed by real consequences. Companies participating in Russian oil trade risked having their US dollar assets frozen, losing access to the US banking system, or being completely barred from doing business with American companies. Suddenly, buying Russian oil wasn't just a financial choice, it became a geopolitical gamble. For India, this was a game changer. Major state-owned companies like Indian Oil Corporation, Hindustan Petroleum, and Mangalore Refinery and Petrochemicals hit the pause button on energy cooperation with Russia. Even private giants like Reliance Industries and HPCL Middle Energy adopted a cautious wait-and-see approach. Collectively, these companies once accounted for about 65% of India's Russian crude imports. Now, facing the threat of secondary sanctions, they had no choice but to reconsider. This law escalated the situation from a trade disagreement to a full-blown geopolitical crisis. India could either risk its economic stability and global market access, or it could comply with the US and stop importing Russian crude. And that decision would soon lead to millions of barrels of oil being stranded at sea, a dramatic consequence we'll explore next. The moment India decided to step back from Russian oil, the impact was immediate and visible, literally on the high seas. 5 giant oil tankers carrying a total of 3.4 million barrels found themselves stranded, unable to dock at Indian ports for over 10 days. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a floating crisis. Russia had no time to waste. Sending the oil back or storing it would cost even more, so it turned to its other major buyer, China. To make the deal work quickly, Russia offered the oil at $35 per barrel, a steep discount that saved China roughly $68 million in purchase costs. From a commercial perspective, Russia was essentially selling at a loss. But there was no alternative. The oil was already at sea and Russia had to move it fast. This moment revealed a bigger truth. India's role as a reliable buyer was no longer guaranteed. Russia had relied on India for consistent demand, but now its strategy had to shift, and the country faced the urgent task of finding new buyers. Meanwhile, India wasn't just avoiding Russian oil to save money, it was repositioning its energy strategy. The refineries began diversifying, looking to secure crude from other regions to fill the gap. This was the start of a long-term change in the global oil landscape, where decisions weren't only about price, but also politics, sanctions, and international alliances. By now, the story isn't just about stranded tankers, it's about a reshaping of energy trade that could affect billions of dollars in revenue, supply security, and geopolitical influence. With Russian oil off the table, India had to act fast to secure its energy future. Cheap Russian crude had been a major part of its imports, but now the country faced a simple choice: pay more for oil from other regions or risk energy shortages. India chose the first option, pivoting toward suppliers in the Middle East and the Americas. Major state-owned refineries like Indian Oil Corporation and Hindustan Petroleum, along with private giants like Reliance Industries, began reducing their Russian purchases. Some even planned to import millions of barrels from the Americas in early 2026 to fill the gap. This was a strategic move, a way to maintain steady oil supply while staying safely within the limits of Western sanctions. Of course, this shift came at a cost. Oil from the Middle East or the Americas is significantly more expensive than Russia's discounted crude, but India prioritized geopolitical safety and economic stability over short-term savings. It was a calculated decision, better to pay more than risk penalties or trade restrictions that could hurt its broader economy. This strategic shift also sent a clear signal to the global market. India was ready to diversify, reduce dependency on any single supplier, and take control of its energy security. For Russia, the warning was equally clear. Losing India meant it would need to scramble for new buyers or risk revenue losses, forcing further discounts and reshaping international oil trade dynamics. India's move wasn't just about oil, it was a chess game on a global stage, with energy, money, and politics all in play. So, where does this leave us? Russia's once reliable buyer, India, has stepped back, forcing the country to rethink its export strategy. Millions of barrels of crude were stranded, discounts had to be offered, and China benefited from a deal it might never have expected. Meanwhile, India is securing its energy needs from the Middle East and the Americas, even at higher costs, to avoid crossing geopolitical red lines. This story shows how deeply intertwined energy, economics, and geopolitics are. Oil isn't just a commodity, it's a tool, a weapon, and a bargaining chip. Decisions made by governments and companies ripple across the globe, affecting prices, trade flows, and even international alliances. Looking ahead, the big question remains, who will be the next major buyer willing to take on Russian oil at a discount? Can India maintain its energy security while navigating sanctions and global pressures? And how will Russia adapt if more traditional buyers step back? The energy chessboard is constantly shifting, and every move has enormous consequences. This is just the beginning of a story that will continue to unfold over the coming years. If you want to stay updated on this high-stakes global energy drama, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll keep tracking these changes, from market shifts to geopolitical strategies, so you won't miss a single move.